Good morning. We are here with yet another interesting interview. I would first of all like to thank Mr. Bipindra for graciously agreeing to do this interview with us. Mr. N.C. Bipindra has been a journalist for over 2 decades with special interest in aerospace, defense, and national security. During his journalistic career, he has established strong relationships with politicians, government officials, and officers from the armed forces, paramilitary organizations, and police across India. So I would like to start my interview with a small brief, sir. So the
Sure.
recent revelations about China's extensive misinformation campaign are deeply concerning and reflect a deliberate effort to sow discord and undermine global stability. The orchestrated dissemination of false information through major social media platforms are aimed at discrediting India on various fronts. It is a blatant violation of ethical and as well as diplomatic norms. This campaign by China spans critical issues from international diplomacy to sensitive regional conflicts, showcasing a calculated strategy to manipulate public opinion. China's microaggressions against India's G20 presidency are indicative of a larger pattern of interference seeking to delegitimize India's rightful leadership role. The misinformation propagated about Manipur is not only misleading but also dangerous as it fuels communal tensions and threatens regional stability. By falsely asserting India that by falsely asserting that India operates concentration camp, China is actually engaging in a dangerous narrative that could have real world consequences. The deliberate spread of falsehoods in India-China row is a blatant attempt to disrupt strategic partnerships and as well as sow division. The campaign against Dalai Lama is not only malicious but also disrespectful of religious and cultural sensitivities. Accusation of misconduct and exploitations are baseless and offensive. The revelation of the revelation that China funds media organizations and journalists that was actually that was actually written in your report to push its narratives is deeply troubling and as well as disturbing to a lot of uh, uh, general citizens like us. So I would like to ask you my first question, sir. So what do you think are the primary objectives of China's misinformation campaign against India? And how do they exactly align with China's broader, geopolitical goals in the region?
Yeah, thank you, Anu, for this opportunity to be on your interview show for Chennai Center for China Studies. And it's a pleasure to be on your organization's events every time. I had the opportunity to be in Chennai recently and had a wonderful interaction with the Triple CS team there. The question that you have raised is not just pertaining to India, it's actually a global concern at this point in time. But since we are dealing with specifically India, I would like to just point out to you that this objective of Chinese in indulging in this kind of a warfare. It's broadly for your audience's sake. Let me just explain what it is. It's called as a three warfare strategy that the PLA adopted, few years ago. Not just few years ago, a decade ago or so, where they decided to indulge in warfare, which is not conventional warfare. Conventional warfare is, fighting with your air force, army, and navy on the ground, at sea, and in air. Firing bullets and throwing bombs at each other, and that is a conventional war on the ground, in air, and at sea. But this is a three warfare strategy is warfare in the domain which is not these three domains. Essentially, in cyberspace, in say the media space, and also in the think tank and other opinion makers space. Essentially, the idea behind this three warfare strategy, the objective of Chinese is to, to borrow Sun Tzu's ideas of art of war, is to win a battle without having to fight that battle. Basically, you win a war without fighting a war. When they say not fighting a war, it means conventional war. Otherwise, they are actually fighting a war in the other domains, in the new domains that have emerged as far as warfare is concerned, which is the cyber domain, the media domain, and also the opinion making domain. So these are different domains, and there is one more domain which is called as the lawfare or legal warfare domain, which is fighting another country using laws of your own country. That is, if China is fighting that war, then China will use its own laws against an enemy country, and also use international laws, against the interest of the enemy country, and also use, if it is a democratic nation, then use a war, legal warfare within the democratic country to weaken the system that is existing there. Essentially, they try to weaken the system from within. That is the idea. And in this three warfare strategy, this propaganda warfare is a very important warfare. Information warfare is very important. And if you look at it, it's essentially creating a fifth column within the enemy state. You create a set of warriors who are not gun-toting warriors, essentially, but they are warriors which you use information as a weapon, who use propaganda as a weapon, who use influence as a weapon to weaken the system from within. So they come into play even when there is no conventional war that is happening. Like, for example, this Ladakh conflict is going on. If you had watched what had happened from 2022 till now during the Ladakh conflict that is going on right now, you will find that there are several think tank executives who have written in 2020 against Indian interests. Like, say, they would write, or even media personalities, former officers who are currently in the media, writing, former military officers who are in the media, who are journalists now, writing that, for example, they will say that Indian army cannot withstand the People's Liberation Army of Communist China even for 5 days in a conventional war. This is actually propaganda. You are actually trying to demoralize not only the Indian soldiers, but also the general public of the country, creating doubts in their minds whether the Indian army is capable of fighting China in a conventional war. So you essentially try to provoke this mentality and mindset, to create a mentality and mindset of a defeatist mindset, essentially saying that, okay, I cannot defeat, I am the loser. This kind of a feeling is injected into the minds of the people. This is essentially done by the Chinese. India is one of their targets in this three warfare strategy, essentially because they see India as a rising power in the Asian domain, the Asian region. And fortunately, India being a democracy, it obviously aligns its national interest with other democracies in the world. And China being an authoritarian, non-democratic country, one-party ruled country, they see an ideological threat from India, and also a threat of India aligning with forces that are actually fighting the Chinese in various domains at this point in time. So, like forces like US and other democracies, Australia, England, the United Kingdom. So all these nations are fighting the Chinese's different warfare strategies, the three warfare strategies at different levels. So they are essentially trying to put India down by doing this kind of a campaign, three warfare campaign, which aligns with their conventional warfare that they are doing currently in Ladakh. All along the LAC, they have been doing this conventional warfare. They try to do the salami slicing strategy, where they try to gain inches and inches of territory from the enemy, and ultimately they try to claim that in the border dispute discussions that happen with the enemy country. So when I say enemy country, it doesn't mean that you have already declared them as an enemy. I mean, India has not yet declared China as their enemy, but there is a possibility that at some point there is a conventional war that happens, and China will probably, what it did in 1962, it might do it again with India, just to put down India in some manner. So that is why we continue to call China as an enemy state. And as the former Defense Minister George Fernandez said, India's number one enemy is China. It's not Pakistan. Let's be very clear about it. Many people, think that China is some kind of a friendly country. I think they're living in fool's paradise. So I would stop here, and if there are any follow-up questions on this, I think I've given a very long answer to this question of yours. So, yeah.
More than long, it is a detailed one. I was able to learn a lot from this, and I have a few follow-up questions with this, sir. Actually, this was more of a general, but then I would like to focus on how the narratives of China affected the G20 in general, as to like in what ways has China's campaign specifically targeted India's G20 presidency, the Manipur conflict or the India-Canada row, because China has been strategically utilizing its social media platforms, such as be it Facebook, Instagram, or any other, YouTube for that matter. Even though they have banned all these social media platforms in their country. So, with the report that you've given us, so I read that they have something called the 50 Cent Army. So, through that army, how these propaganda of it's either G20 presidency or Manipur conflict or the recent India Canada row, how are they trying to how are they trying to bring out a whole different narrative as to what is actually happening?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important question, and it enables me to elaborate on what I said as in my introductory remarks to your first question that you asked me.
The specific themes that they've been following to.
Exactly. So it's a very good question, in fact, which will bring out the minute details of how things are being done by the Chinese. So when I say three warfare strategy, information warfare, propaganda warfare, it is essentially making use of different media platforms, such as the social media platforms like X, which is formerly Twitter, or Facebook or Instagram. These uneven Chinese tools like Weibo and other such platforms that they have to essentially create a narrative that suits China in the best manner possible, and it will be in the worst interest of the enemy nations. Like for example, you asked this question about G20. So let me tell you what exactly happened. A couple of examples, so which probably everybody has noticed. For example, the G20 theme that India had put forth was Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, which is essentially a Sanskrit term, which means the world is one family. So that's the theme that they had brought out, and one world, one family was was the primary theme that India put out during its presidency, and it was an idea that was floated by India to ensure that there is unity among all nations, there is peace that prevails in the world. These are the kind of ideas behind this theme. Whereas, though this theme was announced sometime in 2022, 2023 was India's presidency, but essentially the theme was put out in 2022. But what China did was in August 2023, as India was preparing to host the final summit, G20 summit, where all the G20 leaders were coming to India to attend the summit event along with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi. China raised an objection to this theme of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, and a very frivolous, very frivolous objection. They said that Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam is a Sanskrit term, and Sanskrit is not the official language used in the United Nations. This is an absurd, very frivolous, very juvenile objection that China raised, for the simple reason that G20 is not a United Nations arm. G20 is an independent body of its own, with the nations, several nations, almost 100 nations now are part of the G20 thing. After the inclusion of the African Union, we are actually nearly touching 100 nations. So, but it's an entirely different platform, unlike the United Nations, and also there are no official languages or anything of the sort in the G20. So, in fact, all nations speak in their own tongue. When they speak, the prime ministers or the presidents, when they come in, the head of the state or the end of the government who come and attend the G20, they speak in their own tongue. They don't use some kind of a common language. But there are translators who enable the translation for others who don't understand this. So what I mean to say is that it was a very juvenile, very childish sort of objection that was raised, just to do a campaign against India and against Sanskrit, which is essentially a very cultural thing for India. culturally very important language for India. It is one of the considered to be one of the oldest Indian languages alongside Tamil, and it's considered to be one of the classical languages in India, and it has been accorded the status of a classical language. But essentially, they wanted to campaign against the Indian idea of cultural identities. So that was the essential idea behind that campaign. So, and also what they did was Xi Jinping finally did not attend the summit meeting itself. He boycotted. I mean, I won't say he boycotted. He had maybe had other reasons because he was not attending several other events also globally that were multilateral events. And the primarily the problem was that Xi Jinping was having some domestic trouble within the Communist Party of China. That was the reason why he didn't attend. But they made use of this opportunity to campaign against that resolution that was passed by the G20, where they consensus was created by Indian diplomatic effort on the issue of the Ukraine-Russia military conflict that is presently going on. Though China was not was one of those people who wasn't very happy with the resolution, it was a consensus resolution, and the summit passed that particular statement, joint statement by all these nations. So they were absolutely against. I mean, they had this gripe against India, assuming the presidency, though it comes in rotation. They didn't want India to gain that kind of a very important status as a nation, powerful geopolitical nation at this point in time in the world. On G20 platform, Prime Minister Modi, being Prime Minister Modi, he made use of this to do a extensive, campaign within India, where Jan Bhagidari, which is the participation of the people in G20. This has never happened in any G20 summits, in G20 presidencies ever till date. The Prime Minister turned it into a people's participation movement. So which was not liked by China, because China doesn't like this present government at this point in time. They want to see this government defeated. So that they did. So you also asked about Manipur. You also asked about Canada. So Manipur, what really happened in Manipur? There are reports, intelligence reports that have come out that some Chinese-funded, Chinese-sponsored, Chinese-supported groups within Myanmar were supplying arms and ammunition to some of the two ethnic groups that were fighting in Manipur. Essentially, China was trying to, on the social media platforms and all, they were trying to propagate, saying that the Hindu majoritarian Modi government was annihilating some religious minority groups in India. I mean, this kind of a campaign did go on. This false campaign was going on in India. I mean, on social media platforms, and also on the media platforms that the China used to campaign against India and try to create essentially what they were trying to do was to weaken India from within. They were trying to create social strife inside India so that the Indian nation weakens. There is social strife, there is social unrest, political unrest, and unfortunately, what had happened was the Indian opposition did not, they sort of went along with the Chinese campaign to target the government on the Manipur issue, instead of coming together to resolve the issue in a very cordial manner between the two ethnic groups which were fighting. So that should have been the aim of all political parties in India. But instead, we saw there was a political campaign with the opposition making use of this opportunity to weaken this government. So this kind of a kowtowing to China's propaganda was happening in India. So that was one of the feature of the information campaign that the Chinese did in India. So on Canada Row, what really happened on the Canada Row? They after the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau raised this credible allegations against India in the Parliament, there were a lot of Chinese media outlets and social media handles. See, we all should know that China does not allow the Western social media handles within China, like Twitter is banned, is not allowed. But they have their people who are called as the 50 Cent Army, which does social media campaigns on Twitter and Facebook and other media platforms, Western media platforms, social media platforms, to do campaigns against India to try and weaken the relationship, bilateral relationship, or the multilateral relationship that India has with all these Western nations, including Canada. So essentially, there was one interesting report by a Chinese national, or rather a Chinese origin Canadian, who lives in Canada but who does YouTube, who runs a YouTube channel. Essentially, what is his name? Lau, I'm forgetting his name. So he's a Chinese national. I mean, Chinese origin Canadian national. He ran a series of video programs on YouTube channel, bringing out evidences of how China was behind the Niger killing. He brought out this video, and it was covered by another very popular, channel by another Chinese origin Australian called what is that called as Inconvenient Truths About China. That is the name of the YouTube handle. They have a Twitter handle also. They also covered the same subject based on Lau's YouTube channel, where they brought out evidences of how China was trying to create a wedge between India and these Western nations, such as Canada, the Five Eye nations, which are US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, all democracies. They wanted to create a wedge between these countries, and they did a hit job on Niger, and wiped out the evidences, tried to wipe out the evidences that they left behind, that it was the Chinese team that carried out this killing, and put the blame on Indian government and its agents. So they tried to do that. So this is what they have brought out with a lot of evidences. So this is a matter for investigation, actually, whether China was really truly involved or not. But the fact that this kind of information is coming out today is something that the Five Eye nations should seriously think about. How China is using its propaganda or its covert operations to create a divide between India, and because India is getting closer to these democracies, we have this Quad in the South China to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region, where India, Japan, Australia, and US are the four nations which are part of the Quad. So these are all some discomforts that that Xi Jinping has with India. So they are trying to create this divide between the two nations, and they also try to project this Niger killing as some kind of India becoming a rogue nation which is carrying out killings left, right, and center in all over the world. And they also try to do some pointers towards some killings that happened within Pakistan. Some jihadi elements were taken out by some inter-gang rivalry. It was also being projected as some Indian action, against these people. So this entire narrative on several fronts, were happening against India on social media. I think it gave me an opportunity to tell you how and things were happening. Thank you.
So with regards to the evidences that are brought out by the YouTube channel, if I'm not wrong, Inconvenient Truths About China. So what kind of evidences are they putting forth actually? Because this is kind of a propaganda, not a propaganda, but a truth revealing thing against China by a Chinese citizen. So that must have
Chinese origin Canadian.
Yes.
Today is actually a Canadian national. Okay. So okay, the kind of evidences is how the kind of vehicles that were used. They mention about 3 vehicles that were used by the Chinese hit job hitmen against Niger, and how they the type of vehicles that were used. Where did they acquire those vehicles? What was the clothing that they were wearing on the day of attack, and how they got out by a flight out of Canada post the killing. So these kind of the evidences are being brought out by this YouTube channel. They give details of all these things, how this happened. So they were wearing this kind of a clothing. They took this car, they went and parked it there, and they did the hit job. Then they got back into the car, went and abandoned that car. Then they got into another vehicle. I mean, it's like a very filmy style of a narration that this guy does. So it's a very interesting thing to watch out.
So China is not only doing this, but is also trying to, intrude with regards to the religious matter. Also, I would like to bring in this. So, like, in what ways has the campaign against Dalai Lama intersected with, broader discussions about cultural and, religious identity, and how has it affected global perceptions of Tibetan Buddhism? Because even this, they are actually trying to, not trying, they're actually kind of succeeding, to be honest, because a lot of misinformation campaign against Dalai Lama has also been, it is evident to see in social media also.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Dalai Lama is a real pain in the neck of Chinese. So they hate him. They hate him. It's a visceral hate. So it's a the hate for him has turned out in such a manner that they have declared him as a terrorist. I can't imagine Dalai Lama being branded as a terrorist. Actually, so he's the one person who has been, even though his nation is under occupation by the Chinese, he's one person who says that no, I'm not asking for freedom. I'm only asking for autonomy. That is the kind of very genial person that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is, and I'm surprised that the China have been propagating this idea that he's a terrorist. And I've never heard of any Tibetans ever talking about violence. Since they follow Buddhism, I've never heard them talk of violence. They always talk of being kind and being non-violent and issues like that. So that is something that we see the Chinese always doing, this kind of a propaganda against the Dalai Lama, which is ridiculous. I think they do this propaganda against even a lot of the Uyghur activists globally. People from East Pakistan, which China occupied and called it as Xinjiang, which is actually a giveaway, new frontier. Xinjiang means new frontier. When you say new frontier, it means you have created a frontier out of nowhere, and that's why it's a new frontier. So essentially, they're giving out that they occupied the territory. The East Turkestan was occupied, and they now call it as Xinjiang, autonomous region or whatever. So they even brand the Uyghur activists globally as terrorists. So this is a tactics that they adopt. This is a strategy that they adopt. Anu, I think there is some kind of echo that's coming from somewhere. Is somebody else speaking out there in the room?
Is it fine now? Because no, sir. Is it fine now?
Yeah. Because there is some noise coming up from your side, so I can hear them. Anyway, that's fine. No problem. So the thing is, this kind of a propaganda against Dalai Lama has been going on, and the one which we recently witnessed is this episode which you mentioned in your introductory remarks of His Holiness the Dalai Lama being branded as a pervert without giving any credence to the cultural nuances of Tibetan life. So essentially, this was an incident where I think the Dalai Lama is interacting with a kid, with a youngster, a young boy, and while interacting with him, he actually gives out there is a cultural nuance to what he stated. He says, eat my tongue," which is essentially in Tibetan, the elders usually, it's like sharing knowledge. A grandpa or grandma or a wealth of knowledge. So when they say eat my tongue, it means they essentially are giving all their knowledge, transferring all their knowledge to the youngster. That's the cultural nuance of that incident. So which was branded as some kind of I don't want to use these kind of terms for His Holiness. So they try to project him as a pedophile, which is a ridiculous statement. I mean, if you don't understand, see, there are a lot of things even in the Indian cultural milieu, which if you look at it, so you might find them very people will get upset looking at those traditions. Okay, but there is a cultural, deeper religious or a spiritual meaning to each of these nuances. I can give you umpteen number of examples. So, I mean, for example, I'll give you, I mean, since you are also from Tamil Nadu, we have this the culture of touching the feet of elders, right? Falling Sashtang Namaskar that we do. In South, they do Sastang Namaskar. Here, they take the shortcut route. They just touch the feet and bend down and touch the feet. I mean, if a Westerner looks at this culture, this kind of a practice, he would say how demeaning it is for an individual to do this. Whereas here there is a spiritual meaning to it. When you go before an elder, you are actually seeking their blessings and gaining knowledge from them as a student from a teacher. So that kind of a guru shishya thing is there even when children do it towards their elders. The respect that they show towards their elders. So there is a cultural nuance to everything that happens. I mean, there is a huge controversy that is going on over what one particular political party's spokesperson said on television regarding Abrahamic religions' prophet. So, I mean, they claim that is a cultural nuance. That can be a cultural nuance. But whereas China doesn't have a problem with that cultural nuance, but they have a problem with the Dalai Lama's cultural nuance. That is the biggest tragedy that you can hear about in this controversy, complete controversy. And let me also point out there is another larger aspect of it which we should understand. India is the land of Buddha. Okay, every Buddhist nation around the world revere India as the land of their guru, land of their spiritual figure. Okay, so they look at it as a dharma bhumi. Okay, so it's not just in the Asian context, but also in the Southeast Asian context and also Far Eastern context. There is a long association between India and all these Buddhist nations. In fact, for example, even in China, there is a huge Buddhist population who look at India with a lot of reverence. In fact, Buddhism went to China and it was taken by a Tamilian to China. Okay. So a Tamilian Buddhist monk was the one who took Buddhism to China and spread it there. So this is a cultural historical fact. So what they are trying to do, what the communist China is trying to do is trying to delink Buddhism from the Indian connection that it has, including Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism, in fact, His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself has stated that Tibetan Buddhism has close links with the Indian Buddhism, or rather is an offshoot of Indian Buddhism. Whereas communist China is trying to project something that is non-existent, which is called as Chinese Buddhism. I don't know. Chinese Buddhism, I can't imagine that. So Buddhism is essentially an Indian religious concept which spread from India to all other nations, including China. They can never claim ownership to Buddhism at all. So India is the only land which can claim ownership because it attained enlightenment in India, in both Gaya and Bihar, though he was born in territories which are today identified as Nepal. At that point of time, even Nepal was part of the Indian, the India, cultural India that existed at this point in time. Though geographically there may be different kingdoms that were ruling different parts of India, culturally there was one nation. That concept exists, and I always give this wonderful example from Vishnu Purana. The opening stanza of Vishnu Purana says, Uttaram yat samudrasya himadraischaiva dakshinam varsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. These four line stanza, it means Uttaram yat samudrasya, the land north of the three seas, himadraischaiva dakshinam, which is the south of the Himalayas, varsham tad bharatam nama, which is that land, that nation. Varsham means nation. That nation is called Bharat. Bharati yatra santati. Santati is a very common term that we use. Santati means progeny. The people who live in that land, in this nation, are called Bharatiyas. This is stated in Vishnu Purana, which is one of the oldest Indian literature. So the concept of a geographical India may not have existed because there were a lot of different. India is a huge land, huge territory, so it's quite impossible for anybody to occupy the entire spread of the Indian geographical territory. Whereas the cultural concept always existed through 5,000, 7,000 years of India's existence, Bharat's existence as a nation has existed. So what I mean to say is that Nepal, though geographically today it is politically it's a different nation, culturally it was one nation, it was part of Bharat at some point in time. Even Kailash Parvat, today it is inside Chinese territory. But would you say that, I mean, it is inside Tibet, which is occupied by China. Let me correct that. So would you say that Kailash was not culturally part of the Indian, the idea of Bharat? It was, because we celebrate Kailash as a very important spiritual landmark in Indian continent, right? Indian nation today. So these are all some of the nuances that the Chinese forget when they do this campaign against India, and it is our duty to keep highlighting it again and again so that people don't fall prey to this propaganda.
So I do have another question. So this whole thing is very clear to me now. But then I have this one question. So in your report, you mentioned about how Indian journalists are actually being trained by China, and how they've been, given, apart from money, be it apartments or whatever properties that they can, have or own in China. So the recent case that was actually covering the headlines of literally all newspapers was the arrest of Miss Tista. So what actual evidence supports the claim that China is financially supporting media organizations and journalists to promote its propaganda? And how does this funding network operate in different countries like India, and to also add about how in Africa also? So how can India actually effectively counteract China's misinformation campaign, both domestically and also on an international stage? Could you brief on that, sir?
Yeah, sure. It's essentially, if you look at, I mean, the Tista arrest is not connected with the Chinese money being given to her. It's a different case. It's a case of misappropriation of funds and also for misguiding the court. I mean, that is an entirely different case. But whereas there is a Tista connection to the Chinese money also, which has come out through the NewsClick episode.
Yes.
The New York Times published a report
Yes,
recently,
report, yeah.
I think 3-4 months back, about
Yes.
how a person.
It was just a one-line report about NewsClick and Miss Tista.
But actually after that there is a lot of investigation that has come out.
Yes.
So the New York Times investigation just had a passing reference to the NewsClick episode, where it says that a person by name Neville Roy Singham, who was an industrialist based in the US, but has a Sri Lankan origin behind him, was funding NewsClick, which is a media outlet in India, and he was also asking this NewsClick to publish reports against India and in favor of China, propagating most of the party line that the Chinese Communist Party wanted these people to put out. So essentially, that was the thing, and Neville Roy Singham was the one who was doing this funding for this NewsClick thing. They took a stake also in that. I think Worldwide Media Holdings is the firm through which some investment was made in NewsClick by Neville Roy Singham. And essentially, if you look at this episode, Neville Roy Singham lives in Shanghai for several years now, but he holds an American passport. Okay, he lives in Shanghai, and he's very close to the Communist Party of China. Okay, and he has been doing this bidding of Communist Party of China for a very long time. And interestingly, there is another company, Chinese company by name, I think its name is Baku Group. One second. Maku or Baku Group. One second. I'll tell you the name of Maku. MAKU. Maku Group is a Chinese media company, and the state MAKU. Yeah, Maku. This Maku Group's stated objective is essentially to tell the China. I mean, I'm actually trying to paraphrase. Tell the China story to the world. That is the objective of. Essentially, they are a propaganda tool under the United Front Works Department. Okay. They are essentially, the purpose of that Maku group is for that. If you go, if there was a report which said, in one of the reports I read, if somebody visited Neville Roy Singham's office in Shanghai, and when they visited that office, the office was the same building from where Maku group also operated. And when they went into the office, they could not differentiate between the Maku group's office area and Neville Roy Singham's office area. It was one and the same. It's a big giveaway. Why is he hiding behind semantics? I don't understand. He's a Chinese agent. Let's be very clear about it, and it will come out as and when investigations happen. And after this NewsClick episode came out and cases were registered against NewsClick by various agencies in India, enforcement agencies like Enforcement Directorate and CBI and the Delhi Police Special Cell and all that, Neville Roy Singham gave out a statement saying that no, I am a very innocent guy. I only invest in good media startups and all that. And that was published by the Global Times edition from Chennai. Okay, that statement was published by the Global Times edition from Chennai, which is Mr. N. Ram's The Hindu. So, very oddly named newspaper there. And Mr. N. Ram was so jubilant about putting out the particular statement of Neville Roy Singham on social media. I was thinking that probably he's afraid that the news is tightening around him very soon. So it's quite possible that he may be behind bars very soon for the same reason of taking Chinese money. So, I mean, I leave it at that. I don't want to elaborate more on this particular aspect. So this is the NewsClick episode is behind Teesta's the allegation against Teesta of having received money. So, lot of funding. I think at one point the investigation brought out about 70 crore rupees was funded through foreign channels to NewsClick, and then another investigation came out about 30 to 40 crore rupees was routed to. I mean, these are all ballpark figures. I don't have the exact figures right now. I'm not able to recall the exact figures, but somewhere around this much money was the investigation brought out. Were all routed from different foreign sources to NewsClick. And out of those funds, you will find it very funny. There is an electrician who handles electrical maintenance work in NewsClick's office. You know what was the money he received from NewsClick as payment? He received some 25 lakh rupees for maintenance of electrical cable and issues like that. If this is not funneling funds to, or rather hawala, you pay money to this person and receive it back in some other form, in some other route. So this is basically fraud, financial fraud. So they were committing this. So similar funding was also given to Gautam Navalaka, who is an accused in this Naxalite violent episode of this Elgar Parishad episode, where he is an accused. So he was also given some 40 lakh rupees money. And Teesta Sidilwadar also received some money. What for were they giving it? What was their journalistic contribution to NewsClick? I didn't, I didn't see anything of this sort, some kind of a journalistic contribution or anything from Teesta Sidilwad to NewsClick, unless this payment is routed to her to do anti-India campaigns, campaign against some individual politicians, or campaign against the present government of India. What for is this money being given? This is a legitimate question that anybody would ask, right? So the investigating agency is asking this question. So if all these people are too clean about their dealings, including Mr. Rendram, should come out and say, subject themselves to the investigation. What is their problem?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why is any common man who's running some news website not being investigated by the government?
Exactly.
There are a lot of other, individuals who are running websites which are writing stories against this present government. No?
Yes.
There are several websites, there are several, even including several newspapers are writing against this government. So why are they not being investigated? Why only NewsClick? Oh, and NewsClick is such a, I mean, they themselves say that we are such a very small platform. Why are we being targeted? If you are such a small platform and you are being, investigated, it means there is something wrong with your operations, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, unless there is some evidence, it can't be proved in a court of law. So subject yourself before the courts, get absolved from the court. In fact, the Delhi High Court refused, the pleadings of both, Prabir Purkyasta and his accountant, in seeking some relief. They said that the evidences that are on record at this point, and not evidences, the material on record, I mean, using the court terms, the material on record shows that there is a serious offense that has been committed against this country. So some serious offense against the Indian national interest has been committed. That's what the court has said. So you subject yourself. Now you have gone to the Supreme Court. Let the Supreme Court hear your pleadings. Let them decide. Okay. So you have a woke Supreme Court Chief Justice. Maybe he will allow it. But the point is, the fact is a fact. Okay.
Yes.
The fact is a fact. So you need to subject yourself before the court and state facts and get relief, whatever you want. You might get a relief from the Supreme Court. It is quite possible. But you have to subject yourself before, to the laws of the land, right? So they can't claim that being a journalist, I'm above board, I'm above law, nobody can question me. You cannot claim these kind of rights, which are not allowed to you under the Constitution of India. It's as simple as that. So Teesta Seetilwad matter is that the episode is related to NewsClick, where she received funds, and what is the purpose of those funds is what is the investigation is all about, and how was it used. Okay. So there were also a lot of illegal activity with regard to the investments that were made in NewsClick by a foreign, company, foreign entity. These are all under subject of investigation. So it will come out. And obviously, all these fundings have happened through Neville Roy Singham, who is a Chinese agent.
Yes.
Which is a given.
Yeah. Sir, one last question, sir, because all of this has been very clear. But then a recent report, it's not related to India though, but then a recent report released by United States of Peace stated that China's propaganda game is actually getting more strong and stronger, particularly in and around Africa, majorly the continent itself. So what are your comments on this? Because Africa already is kind of, under a debt trap, under China's debt trap. So what more would this propaganda and this involvement and fundings of all these African journalists or all these African newspapers or news channels would further do to the continent as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry you asked this in the previous question itself. I missed it out. Thank you for raising it again. So essentially, you mentioned about China hosting a group of journalists every year annually. They provide a scholarship for some journalists, some fellowship for journalists, under which they take journalists from South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, West Asia. I mean, these are the target nations for China, and they take them on a year-long fellowship. So you mentioned it, they are provided a monthly allowance, huge sum in yuan terms, and also they are provided accommodation in a very posh locality. Since you are from Chennai, I will give you a Chennai example. Say Boat Club area in Adayar.
Yeah.
So that kind of a posh area. Or if a person is from Delhi, then I would say, somewhere in Southex, if you get a posh area somewhere in Southex. Or if you are from Mumbai, then I would say Bandra. If you get a, spacious, huge apartment in Bandra. So these are the kind of location in Beijing where these journalists are provided apartment accommodations. And they are also given access to conducted tours where there is always a Chinese agent along with you. He will go and brief you on this, that, and everything about what is happening in China, they will expect that you will write. Mind you, while on the fellowship, these journalists do not shed their affiliation to the media house in India to which they are working, with which they are working. They do not shed the affiliation. They continue that affiliation and they write plug pieces glowing tributes to China in those publications in India, while sitting in China, enjoying the hospitality of the Chinese, taking money from them, whining, dining, everything happens there. If there are other weaknesses that these journalists have, that is also taken care of. And then they come and write glowing tributes on China in the Indian media, and the Indian media carries it shamelessly. Shamelessly, they carry it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of journalists. I personally know all of them.
Oh,
Most of them, not all of them. Most of them I know who went on this fellowship and enjoyed this kind of hospitality of China. So, in fact, Annunthra Krishnan, who's the Beijing correspondent for the Hindu, did write one piece for another publication where he talks about this fellowship, how this fellowship manipulates the journalist's independence and his objectivity is compromised. So he writes that. So this is a fellowship that they use, and they use it not only for Indians but also for Pakistan, Sri Lanka. I mean, journalists from the South Asian region, Southeast Asian region, West Asia, and Africa.
Okay.
And they also have the strategy of buying out media organizations which are in financial trouble. Okay, they buy them. Like, for example, a lot of African publications have been bought out by
Yes.
China, and it's being run by China today.
Yes.
So they do this. This is also another media strategy that they adopt. In fact, Forbes, until say 3 or 4 months ago, was owned by China for almost about half a decade. China was owning it. Only recently they sold it to an Australian industrialist. So Forbes magazine was bought out by China. So I mean, this kind of buying out of media organizations they do, and they control the editorial narrative in these things, and then they also plug their propaganda pieces in these media outlets. Even in India, for example, if you see, the Chinese embassy here buys out ad space, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, they buy, and they run into lakhs. If it is a multi-edition advertisement, it runs into crores. In fact, the advertising rates run into crores. So they buy that in crores, and they publish, propaganda pieces in the form of advertorials. They're called as advertorial. It's an advertisement plus editorial content.
Yeah.
So they call it as China Today, something of the sort. The page is, branded as China Today or China News, something like that. And then they publish these kind of things even in Indian media. They do the same thing in West Asia. They do the same thing in Africa. So these are essentially tactics that they adopt to buy influence through propaganda in the local media, to they are trying to mold the mind space of the people, local people, and the politicians there. Of course, for most politicians, if they are corrupt, they take money from China and they are happy doing their bidding. Even in African countries and everywhere. And if it is the general public, then they fall prey to these kind of propaganda tools that the Chinese adopt. So this tactics they've been adopting all over the world, but their main focus is in the global south, which is essentially poorer nations where they have Belt and Road Initiative projects that they're doing, infrastructure projects that they are working on. So they want pliable governments there. They want the media to only talk good about China. Nothing that the China does. Like, for example, even if for example, in Pakistan, in this China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects, there are a lot of umpteen number of law and order problems that happen there. A lot of locals, say in Gilgit-Baltistan, are opposing it. People in other places in Pakistan are also objecting to it. So, but Baluchistan people are objecting to it. But all that news is suppressed. In fact, there have been bomb attacks on Chinese nationals working on these projects in all these places, both Gilgit-Baltistan and then Balochistan. Local organizations which are opposed to the Pakistani occupation of these territories are opposing this China-Pakistan economic corridor. The CPEC passes through an Indian territory actually, which is under occupation of Pakistan. So we object to it. Similarly, people in Balochistan are also objecting, saying that Pakistan is an occupation force on Balochistan. So there are a lot of organizations that oppose it, and they also physically attack these people. So deaths of Chinese working in these are also suppressed. News is suppressed. So these are the kind of tactics that they adopt, so that nothing negative against China is reported by the media organizations. The entire purpose is to only positive news about China should appear. All negative news should be wiped out from the media space. So it's essentially controlling the mind space of the people. That's the bottom line in these tactics.
So one last question, actually. So what do you think are the takeaways that Indian journalists should actually, follow, or what is that Indian journalists should concentrate more on it rather than, falling the trap of all these Chinese exclusive offerings?
Yeah, essentially, truth is what the Indian journalists should stand for. Just because I don't like a politician doesn't mean that I should be propagating untruths about him or his government or his political party or his people who are supporting him. I'm not talking about one individual politician. I'm talking across the board.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a non-partisan comment. I mean, if because somebody doesn't like Rahul Gandhi, they should not be spreading lies about Rahul Gandhi. Media person should stick to the truth, and they should not be indulging in propaganda. Report truth. So that is precisely what they should be doing, unless you want to do activism. If you are want to do activism, you openly state that you want to do activism. I want to do activism against China. I will do activism against China. I have no qualms about admitting it. I am an activist against China. Yes. So you state your objective. If you want to be an activist against somebody, you openly state it. Don't hide behind the cloak of being a neutral person, neutral journalist to do your propaganda work, and also try to plug in your propaganda, through those work. In fact, I try to keep away my journalistic work from my activism work. I try to do that. I tried the maximum to do that. Okay. My activism is always outside my journalistic responsibilities. Okay. So you have a clear demarcation of what you want to do and how you want to do it. So you have a clarity on that aspect of it.
That is one thing I guess each and every journalist or students who are actually pursuing journalism should have and should keep it in mind.
I mean, everybody, no individual can ever say that I'm a political person. Being apolitical is also a political stand. For example, everybody has a political thought. Everybody has a political side to them. They have opinions on what is happening around them. They have opinions on, generally we would have heard this slogan that today's student is tomorrow's citizen. I don't believe that. Today's student is today's citizen. Everything that happens in this country affects a student, affects everybody. So you are impacted by them. You form political opinions. It is always possible that you form political opinions on various issues. But essentially, I welcome it. I welcome that you have political opinions. I welcome that you have political ideas. I welcome that you have political awareness. But truth, stand by truth. Try to sift through information and identify what is truth. And I have one single thumb rule as far as India-China news is concerned. Anything that benefits India is good news. Anything that is against India's national interest is Chinese propaganda. I'm very clear about it.
Thank you so much, sir, for spending your time for this interview. I personally did learn a lot of things apart from apart from whatever that is mentioned in your report, because I've gone through your report for like 5 to 6 times to write various articles. The one I'm working on, those about African media. I still read your report on Chinese media propaganda, and I connect with what is happening in Africa, and I was able to learn a lot from it. Thank you so much for bringing out what pre-warfare strategy is and what are the major things that China is trying to do against India, which they might call it as news, but to how it concerns us, it is a propaganda that is, made by China against India. Thank you. I once again thank you, sir, for taking your time to give this interview to me. Thank you so much, sir.
Let me end by stating only one thing in this
Yes, sir.
aspect. Even facts can be twisted and made use of for propaganda. Let us be very clear about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned this. For them, it might be news, but for India, it is propaganda. It is a fact. You twist in facts to suit your. You may be stating facts, but you may twist it in such a manner that it suits your propaganda. That's what China has been doing it. So let us be watchful of this.
Yes, sure.
Strategy that China adopts and create awareness. I keep telling this. It's not just enough that you be aware of it. You create awareness in another 100 people and tell them to create awareness in another 100 people, each of them with another 100 people. So that is how awareness will be created. That is the only way we can counteract or counter the Chinese pre-warfare strategy in India.
Yes, definitely, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, and please convey my regards to Commodore R.S. Vasan.
Definitely.
So thank you so much for this opportunity, and let's meet again for another event.
Definitely, sir. Definitely, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anu.